Well, let's move on to conversation point number 2. This is our debate number 2 here. It's more of a discussion to really understand what's going on in the digital media space. There's been a series of government announcements that have come forward, a lot of questions that are being asked. The most recent government announcement, in fact, has been to remind the companies which are in the digital media space to conform with the regulation, with the rule that the government had announced last year, limiting FDI to 26%. Now, this is for your news platforms, your online news platforms, some of whom will be joining us tonight in this conversation. This is all for also for your OTT platforms, where you actually consume a lot of your other non-news content as well. The FDI limit there is 26%. The government has reminded everybody that you need to comply with this by next year. But even if you have lower FDI, you need to submit all the details to the I&B ministry. Now, if you remember, this came in news as well a few weeks ago. The decision has been made to move these players from the tech industry to under the information and broadcast industry. Now, information and broadcast industry has sought details from the news media and even the non-news media digital companies, details about the shareholders, details about the owners and the promoters, and who has how much, their addresses, audited reports, their financial statements. All of those details have to be submitted to the government. There is also an expectation that now that these players have been brought under I&B, perhaps there will be new rules. The government, the I&B minister, has in fact at many occasions also indicated at this point that there perhaps is a need for regulation, which is where a bit of a concern really comes in, especially for the news organizations that function in the digital space. Let's try and understand what's going on and what kind of clarity are these digital portals really seeking. I want to say good evening to the panelists who are joining us on this show. I've got Nikhil Pawar, editor of Media Nama, joining us this evening, Abhinandan Sekhri, co-founder for Newslaundry, Dr. Anurag Batra, founder for Exchange for Media and editor-in-chief for Business World, and Charu Pragya, spokesperson for the BJP, also will be with us in just a bit. Dr. Batra, if I can start with you. To understand, largely, unlike the broadcast media, there haven't been too many defined advisories, guidelines, rules for digital media, which is the new age version. Now, to what extent is this a fair move by the government to seek information, to say that maybe some rules are needed? To what extent can this get problematic?
Well, the government and everyone understands that more and more eyeballs are on digital media. The millennials, which also constitute a large vote bank, are on digital media. So the impact, Tanvi, when you do this debate, a lot of people watch it live as they are right now on Mirror Now, but they may go to a mirrornow.com site and consume it later. So clearly the government understands that the impact of digital media is now coming at par with, say, traditional broadcast media, and hence this need to be able to ring fence media. I would say that if the government wants to really bring in regulation, then the government needs to talk to the top stakeholders and bodies. And there I say there are two digital associations in the country. Both are very polarized. They are not. They don't have any middle ground. One represents one thought process. The other represents another thought process. So I think it is only natural that we in the digital media space are looking at it with caution. And dare I say, some of us with suspicion. The government needed to talk to all the stakeholders and come up with a code which is more self-regulatory. I understand that there are rogue elements in every media, but the government already has details. All the media companies are registered with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and hence the government can pull out all the details. In some way, it comes across as a reaction to control media, to control digital media. I think as the I&B minister yesterday said at the on the Press Freedom Day and talked about the press freedom, he talked about the fact that we need to give comfort, but at the same time, there is regulation needed to separate good content from bad content. I think viewers should do it, surfers should do it, the government should put in a framework, but in the way the government has moved it right now, I'm not sure it's seen as a positive thing. I think the government will need to reconsider how it is approaching it. The intent may be good, but the way it is coming across is definitely seen with suspicion. And
Okay. So let me then get more specific, and Abhinandan, let me come to you on that. What's the exact point that's making digital players uncomfortable right now? Is it the commentary in terms of remarks that are being made by the ministers? Is it the move to bring it under INB? What is it that's making everybody uncomfortable? Abhinandan, I think you're on mute. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, I think sorry about that. Some of that has been actually articulated by the panelists before me. Doctor had said that clearly the intent doesn't seem for a more efficient or smooth regulatory framework where the digital industry can prosper. Now, if I could just make 3 or 4 basic larger points, because if we start getting into every nitty-gritty, one can point out to so many inaccuracies and bad faith decisions and utterances of the government or representatives of the government. Now, when did this first regulatory fatura floated? In a case where outright hate speech by a Sudarshan channel was being heard. Now, rather than say, what are we going to do about this? Because that was violating laid down guidelines. They said, Inko chodo, let's get digital players in. Has any digital players said what Sudarshan says? No. So that was the first red light. They're not interested in putting any check on the hate spewers on their team. They just want control. Secondly, I mean, an entrepreneur friend of mine who has a lot of disdain for the media, he says, I keep reading articles of your colleagues of ease of doing business. Clearly, the only people write about ease of doing business are those who've never done business themselves. And I completely agree with the person. When all that they're asking for, who are your promoters, who are your directors, this is there with the Ministry of Corporates. When you incorporate a company, you have to do all this. You don't incorporate a company and start off. But they say, ab yahan submit karo. This is typical triplicate में form करो, form number 4 आप counter number 3 पे दो, फिर counter number 2 पे दो. I mean, the kind of regressive, and you speak to any foreign, investors of funds, they may not say anything, but they laugh at the kind of regulatory frameworks and prescriptions that this government comes up with.
Okay.
And finally, I'll concede to Nikhil and others. I can give you my own personal example. The confusion in the government itself, that where do we fall? Are we broadcast? Are we print? They are making it up as they go along. And therefore, there is enough evidence to show this is in bad faith. This has nothing to do with creating a more robust environment for an industry in its infancy. Digital India and let's make India a powerhouse of media is all bolne ki baatein. But when it comes to actually doing something to make a conducive environment where this industry can actually compete with the world, right now, with the FDI rule, there is no incentive for anyone to incorporate in India. There is no incentive.
So let me take it a step back and pick up on one point that you made. And you said that these details are already available with the government. In my initial avatar, I was a business reporter. It was a matter of minutes for any of us to pull out those details about promoters and shareholders. From the government website, it didn't take much. And so they have the details for everybody. So, Nikhil, again, I will come to the same point in the question. Then where is the discomfort coming from? If this information is already available, even if they ask it one more time, why are we viewing this with suspicion?
Well, Tanvi, if you think about it, the real question is, why is there a need to regulate digital media, right? If there is anything that is malicious that's being done by a digital news site, there are laws governing that. If there is anything illegal that's being published on those sites or broadcast by those sites, there are laws governing that. If there is defamation, there's a law governing that. So why do you need, not just for digital, but for all media, why do you need a separate regulatory framework with codes and controlled by the Ministry of INB? When under free speech, we should have the exact same rights as any citizen should, right? So the same freedom that a citizen have to express what they want, as long as it is legal, should lie with the media without any checks and balances, additional controls that are put in. I don't understand that reason. In fact, when Mr. Javadekar first announced these regulations last year, he said that digital media entities asked for a 26% cap, and it's meant to support them. But the fact is, we don't even know who asked for it. Nobody's asked for it. No, you ask Abhinandan, all digital publishers don't want this additional regulatory burden. Most digital media companies find it difficult to survive. Many of them are tiny startups that are just trying to do what they can. This additional cost of regulation, having to go and deal with bureaucrats, submitting papers, is just a means of controlling the digital media, because that's a real free media left today, apart from a few channels like yours. So, that openness, that freedom for people to express an opinion, because they have an impact and the government is uncomfortable with that, they're being regulated. Why do digital entities that do not have FTI have to submit their details? How do you classify what is a news and current affairs website or news and current affairs entity in this space, when you have entertainment channels with news and with talk shows that cover news and current affairs? How do you define news? So who declares and who doesn't is also not very clear over here. And they've only given a 1 month deadline. So
news aggregators as well, which would then bring in
control mechanism is coming in.
Websites like Facebook as well. Does it include news aggregator portals as well? I mean, I don't know. Would it bring
that's the thing.
It does.
Platforms like Facebook under regulation?
Tanvi, there are grey areas. Those areas have not been defined. See, first of all, I'd like to say, I know Charu has to come in and I'll quickly make an interview. I fully agree with Abhinandan and Nikhil. And I can tell you that if I were the government, I would do the following. First of all, I would get top 20 media entrepreneurs, the news, media and digital guys in a room and talk to them and get their views. People like Nikhil, people like Abhinandan, across whatever their viewpoints are. Get them in a room, talk to them, possibly build a self-regulatory code. And third is also, there is a lot of gray areas right now. So the government has put it without thinking through. If the government has already thought about it, it should put out a comprehensive policy. And it comes across something in the midst of COVID when we are dealing with so much. I mean, what is the hurry to do it now? Maybe, as I said, Abhinandan said, Nikhil said, the details are with the ministry. We file our returns. So all the details are with the ministry. Why should we spend when we are barely surviving in a very tough environment? Another, checks and compliances are a drain on our resources, and this is not the way to do. The only thing I say in the government's defense is that in OTT and some digital media, we do need a regulation, but it should be self-regulation and not imposed by the government. And there is a case in the Supreme Court pending. The government, by putting out what it put out, government is legitimate in the way it can bring in policy and framework, but it needs to involve stakeholders. It looks like an attempt to gag media. That's how it comes across.
Okay, let's then now get Charu Pragya in. Nikhil, I will come back to you, but let her at least respond to the points that I've raised, that all three of you have raised so far. Charu Pragya, I think it begins with the fact that the stakeholders weren't even consulted. There was no conversation that happened with the industry before these steps were taken.
Tanvi, first of all, for the person who said that the government is trying to hijack things, let me tell him that there has been a committee in place since 2018. And this conversation about regulating digital content has been around. It's been there for 2 years, and we have seen the misuse of the digital space many a times. Of course, it is a space which comes in very handy for people who want first-hand news, who wants all sorts of opinions on news, but it's also a space which has been misused many a times. We have to understand that a responsibility as big as this comes with its own restrictions. When we have the right to freedom of speech, it has to be tempered with reason. See, I am not pointing out people or channels or platforms and saying that this was right and this was wrong, but we have to agree that there has to be a regulation in place to make sure our citizens by and large are protected from the ill side of what is available on the digital platform.
What is this misuse you're talking about? Can you give us an example? Misuse could mean a lot of things to a lot of different people.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to use a very unconventional example, Tanvi, and I'm a mother to a young child, and I'm going to use that example. A couple of years back, there was something called as the Blue Whale Challenge, which took over the internet. There were these underground websites happening. It was hacking into space. Normal people like
My God, what does this have to do with news?
Have to do with legitimate publishers.
What does this have to do
Okay,
with
let her
news?
finish. Let her finish her
don't
point, please.
know.
Let her make her point.
It
Let her
doesn't
make her point. Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
different things are important for different people, gentlemen, and I did not interrupt you whether I agree with you or not. Allow me the same courtesy. The second thing is, every single time we've seen any sort of an encroachment on the Indian security, it has been done by using the digital space. Also, we've seen platforms where people are being brainwashed by using all sorts of crazy language, crazy reasoning, crazy logic. What is the harm if there is a self-regulation in place? That's my point here, and it is nothing new. Yes, you are right, it has already been in place for the regular media, but digital media has become more and more important in these times. Digital media has actually taken over, in some ways replaced conventional media.
Okay. Okay, Abhinandan, you can
One quick
respond
question.
to this. Self-regulation that's imposed by the government, also in the light of the fact that the minister just recently said that even the broadcast media self-regulation doesn't work. So I don't know what self-regulation is being spoken about.
Yeah, first of all, you use the word self-regulation, which is not okay. I can point out 100 things. Let me ask, ma'am, one thing. Since the government has thought this through for 2 years, forget the content regulation, because that is a much more complicated. वो तो टेढ़ी खीर है जैसे बोलते हैं ना. They have said in 1 year, comply with the FDI policy. Suppose someone has raised capital, has given 40% of equity at, let's say, an 80 crore valuation. And right now, we have some very eminent economists in the cabinet. We have one of the most brilliant cabinets the independent India has ever seen. I'm sure they'll be aware of what the world markets are all about. Right now, if you don't have the capital to buy back from the foreign entity, then what happens? Can you tell me? Because clearly this has been thought through over the last 2 years. What is the repercussion of that? Because no one seems to know.
Yeah, fair enough. Charu Pragya?
Yeah, you have an answer?
And I want to say that, Abhinandan, me and Nikhil, I've never met Abhinandan, but I've had the good pleasure of talking to Nikhil for many, many years. I haven't met him recently. But we all are united. We come from different thoughts. But on this, we are united. I mean, I respect Ms. Charu Priya's comment as a mother and as a citizen, and that's true. But there are rules governing that. I mean, I can say that none of my friends, colleagues in the industry, and I can claim to know the whole media industry and every promoter and every editor that exists in the country, nobody's been consulted. It's been thrust upon us without being, and yes, there is a need for regulation in digital, but this is not the way to do it.
Okay.
This is not the way. There
Okay,
are rules.
Charu Pragya, is there an answer to what happens?
What is the repercussion?
Is there an answer to putting on a deadline for people to sell off their foreign
And
stake?
then you can't throw the baby with the bathwater.
Is giving a
You
credit
can't throw the
facility.
baby with the bathwater.
Okay, let her answer, please. Yes, yes.
What happens then?
That's happening in Mirror now, that people are talking over each other, Tanvi. This is the first time. So this really must be a topic which is...
With only a single politician, yes. With only a single politician on the panel, yes. But go ahead. Do you have a response to what is being asked here?
Yes. So I understand your concerns about the grey areas. I also understand your concerns about everyone not being spoken to and taken into confidence and things being discussed. But you have to understand that there are a lot of varying point of views, and the government has taken them into account before coming up with any kind of a regulation. That is always done. So no regulation.
Okay,
I'm a little short on time. I need to go to Nikhil for the comment that he's been trying to make. If I can just bring him in. Views have been taken, Nikhil, just not of all of you who've come together today.
Yeah. So, Tanvi, first of all, there was no consultation. There was no public consultation. There was no private consultation as far as we know. The committee that was formed in 2018 has barely met since 2018. So I don't know where this is coming from. There has been no consultation even since the 26% cap on FDI was announced. So that's one. Secondly, Ms. Pragya needs to understand that the distinction between what happens on Facebook and what happens on a news site, where there is an editor who controls things. So you cannot equate that the fact that you want to regulate Facebook with the fact that you want to regulate news media, which is the responsible entity, right? speech in India is already regulated. If there is something illegal going on, there are laws governing that. So you can't really use that yardstick to say they're unregulated. They are regulated by law. All businesses, all citizens are regulated in this country. We are contesting additional regulations. Lastly, Anurag is the founder of a site called Exchange for Media, which focuses on the advertising ecosystem. I focus on the technology ecosystem. We are not news and current affairs. Why would we be regulated by this particular situation?
And by the way, and it contradicts
news and
to the
current affairs
policy of the
largely
government.
politics.
In Nikhil's case, in my case, we are
how
governed by
is this
specialist portal 100%. Now we are not clear whether we are in the 100%
Exactly.
or 20%.
Okay. Okay, gentlemen.
Exactly. How do we know? There is no
Did not
clarity.
realize that this ideally should have been given a lot more time. Maybe we can do round 2 with all of you back on the panel if the government doesn't, at least find space for a conversation with the representatives of the digital media. But I'm completely out of time for today. So Charu Pragya and Abhinandan, Nikhil and Dr. Batra, thank you so much for joining us. I think, viewers, one thing is very clear, that there is some amount of discomfort, anxiety as well, a lot of suspicion at the way things are being done, handled, the commentary that's coming out from the government, the steps that have been taken in the recent past. All of this seems to be giving an impression the government wants to now control digital news media. I'm not right now talking about the OTT platforms and the other kind of content which is available and what government may want to do there, or even talking about content aggregators or social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook. We've debated that far too many times. But when it comes to news media portals and those on digital, including broadcast channels who also now have digital arms, we all do. Is there an intent to bring in curbs to control it and regulate it? That's the fear. Perhaps it would do well for the government to come out with a lot more clarity and maybe hold a couple round of conversations with the industry to resolve these issues. Why do you need information that you already have, if not to add to the harassment point? That's what our experts right now said. Completely out of time. We'll have another round maybe later this week. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.